Listening Fanfiction presents Growls and Purrs by Lady of the Wilds, based off the cartoon TV series X-Men Evolution. Read for you by Sierra Steinbrecher. Sunday, the day of rest. It seemed that everyone took that excuse literally around here. Wherever he went around the mansion, Logan would find a student watching the television, reading a book, listening to music, or just staring off into space. If he had it his way, which most of the time he did, the kids would be outside in the sun running one of the many challenging assault courses. But every excuse he got was the same. Jesus never trained on a Sunday. Yeah, well, Jesus never threw fireballs off the first floor balcony either, but that didn't stop them from setting the garden ablaze. Moving through the halls toward the living room, Logan spotted evidence of some of the more active pupils. Half-finished essays laying on the small tables in the hall, telephone messages written on those small sticky pads and taped on the walls. Every now and then he heard a few childish bickerings or someone thinking out loud. But the oddest sound he heard was coming from the living room he was heading for. It was a relaxing sort of sound, one that he was sure he had heard before, but couldn't place it. When he entered the living room, he found the source of the noise. Kurt was curled up on the sofa in a deep sleep and purring gently. Logan moved over to the sofa and watched the teen sleep. He sounded like a cat, even slept like one. His legs were tucked up close to his chest, and his head was resting on his folded arms. His long blue tail was draped over his eyes, blocking out any light. Every now and then the tail would twitch and move over his eyes, making him frown at the irritation. Then it would settle down again and Kurt would purr louder. Logan was unable to help himself, and as he gently sat in the seat next to him, he held out his hand and ran it lightly through the soft fur on his neck. Kurt purred loudly at the contact and muttered something in German. His tail swished back and forwards happily. Logan had to laugh at the sight. Who would have ever thought the kid could look so much like a cat when he slept? Logan wondered if he slept like this at night or if it was only when he napped. He defiantly gave a whole new meaning to the phrase, catnap. Logan must have laughed too loudly because he could see Kurt's ears flicker and his eyes open a crack. He turned his head to look at the older mutant sitting next to him and yawned loudly. "What time is it?" the teen asked, still half asleep, and pushed himself up into a sitting position. Logan suspected that if it wasn't here, the kid might have even stretched like a cat does when they've just woken up. "About half two." Kurt buried his face in his hands and slumped further down the sofa, trying his hardest not to yawn, but failing. "Didn't sleep well." "That stupid thunder kept me up most of the night." Logan understood where he was coming from. It wasn't easy to sleep through a storm when your ears were very sensitive. He didn't get much sleep himself, but unlike the kids, he could function on only a few hours of sleep a night, so there was no need for him to nap during the day. Kurt stretched his arms above his head and yawned again. Logan could see his sharp fangs in all their glory. Logan chuckled to himself when he saw how Kurt arched his back when he stretched. The teen looked at him in confusion and tilted his head ever so slightly to the side. "What's so funny?" "You purr in your sleep." Kurt looked shocked at this little fact and looked at Logan with wide, embarrassed eyes. "I do not!" "Yeah, you do. You sound like a little cat. You even sleep like one." "Please tell me you're kidding." "Fred not. Maybe you and Half-Pint should switch code names. Shadowcat suits you better than Nightcrawler." Logan was enjoying this very much and laughed louder when Kurt growled in frustration and embarrassment. It was a funny sound, not quite a growl, but quite not a purr. It sounded like a young kitten growling for the first time and was just as intimidating as one. Logan threw his head back and laughed even louder than before. "You even growl like one." "I am not a cat, and I don't growl like one either." "Please, Elf. You're just a kitten, and about as intimidating as one." Kurt straightened up and cleared his throat. Logan could just see the embarrassed blush under his fur. "I could be intimidating," he said in his best macho voice, trying to sound more manly. "Not with that kitten growl. You want to scare someone, then you're going to have to really learn the art of good growling. Like this." Logan cleared his throat and gave the elf his best snarl that he could. He was pleased when he saw the kid jump back in fright at the loud feral sound. If there was one thing he could do better than anyone else, it was intimidate. The growl didn't last long, and when he'd finished, Kurt looked nervously at him with even wider eyes. "Let's see atop that, elf." Kurt's gold eyes narrowed, and he moved forward to accept the challenge. Logan waited patiently with a smile on his face as the younger, smaller mutant took a deep breath. He growled louder than last time, but it wasn't anywhere near his volume. If anything, he sounded like a larger cat. His growl wasn't deep enough, and if you listened carefully, you could hear the slight purr as he trailed off. He'd give the kid 7 for effort, but intimidation, well, let's just say no one was going to be fleeing for their lives. Now you just sound like an angry kitten. You have to growl from your chest, not just your throat, and breathe out slowly, Logan told the elf with a superior grin. Taking a deep breath, he let out another, even louder growl than before. Not wanting to be shown up by the larger mutant, Kurt started to growl too, trying to match the volume of the elder. And so it soon became a growling contest. Logan, with his louder and meaner-sounding growl, was confident that he could outlast the teen, but Kurt, he did seem to be trying harder to make himself sound threatening. Kurt was the first to falter, having run out of breath, but a quick inhale and he was ready to try again. It must have looked so strange to see two people growling at each other like animals, each trying to dominate the other. Outside of the room, Kitty had been innocently minding her own business when she heard what sounded like two dogs growling at each other. Her curiosity led her to the door of the living room. Inside, she saw Logan and Kurt both sitting opposite each other, baring their teeth and growling. It was the cutest thing she had ever seen. "Evan, Rogue, you guys have to come and see this," she shouted quietly to the two mutants who had just come down the large staircase. "What's the matter?" Rogue asked, the phasing mutant. "Is Scott and Jean kissing again?" She giggled. Those two were always trying to find a quiet moment where they could make out. Kitty shook her head and held a finger up to her lips, telling the pair to be quiet. Intrigued by Kitty's behavior, they both moved quietly towards the door and peeked in. The two males hadn't noticed they had an audience and continued to growl at each other, only stopping to take quick breaths. Rogue put her hand over her mouth to stop herself from laughing out loud. Evan was nearly doubled over, clutching at his side and trying not to make a sound. Rogue moved away from the door and patted Kitty on the shoulder. "Kitty, go and get your camera." What a great idea. She smiled and sprinted up the stairs to the bedroom she and Rogue shared together. It only took a few minutes for her to find the camera and join her friends downstairs. She didn't bother using the stairs. Instead, she just faced herself through the floor and landed gracefully next to Evan. She was happy to see the boys still having their little competition, and they were getting louder. It was even funnier because Kitty could see all the fur on Kurt's shoulders was standing up, giving him the appearance of a very angry cat. She pressed the play button and settled down to film this cute little male bonding session. Back inside, Kurt was quickly gaining on Logan and was sounding more like a tiger than a kitten. Well, maybe not a tiger, more like a very small leopard. Either way, he was trying his best to outshine and outperform his teacher, but this was the Wolverine he was messing with, so it wasn't a big surprise when he ran out of breath before the older man. Kurt was panting quite heavily by the time Logan decided to call it quits. He didn't even seem out of breath. "Not bad, elf. Not bad at all." "Thanks," Kurt said breathlessly. "Do you still think I sound like a kitten?" More like a large house cat or a very, very small leopard. Still, with a bit more practice, I'm sure we could turn that kitten growl into a lion's roar." Kurt smiled at the praise. He didn't like to scare people, and with his appearance, that was something that often happened. But when it came to battle, having an intimidating roar could come in useful. If anything, at least he could command the kind of respect that Logan got. But for some reason, he felt that Logan would forever think of him as a kitten. After all, how old was the man? Like, over 100? Everyone in this place must be babies compared to him. Kurt cocked his head to the side and said in a defeated tone, "You're going to think of me as a kitten from now on, aren't you?" "Yup." "So, if I'm a kitten, what does that make you?" "I thought that was obvious. I'm an alpha wolf, and you lot are little cubs who haven't grown into your fangs." Kurt leaned back into the sofa, put his arms behind his head, and said with a grin, You know that the Wolverine is a type of weasel, not a wolf. Logan copied Kurt's posture and said it with his own grin. You know a nightcrawler is a type of worm, don't you? Kurt rolled his blue shoulders and stared up at the ceiling. You know, we won't always be cubs. I've lived through 2 world wars and beyond. No matter how old you all get, you'll still be cubs to me. The blue teen grinned, showing off his fangs, and turned to face the man sitting next to him. Logan could see his large golden eyes sparkle with childish mischief. Bet I could beat you any day of the week. Oh, was that a challenge? Logan leaned forward and flashed his own toothy grin. You think you can best the Wolverine? I think I stand a good chance. After all, the fastest animal on land is a cat. The kid had guts, but there was no way he was about to let this kitten get the better of him, and a challenge had to be answered, didn't it? Okay, Elf, you and me in the danger room. 1-on-1. Kurt jumped to his feet and excitedly ran to the door. Logan was quick to follow him, but when he saw what was waiting for them, he froze. Rogue, Kitty, and Evan were staring at them with huge grins and barely controlled the giggles. Had they been spying on them this whole time? They were either very brave or very stupid. Logan turned his head towards the elf and said with an evil grin, Before we head down to the danger room, how about we teach these 3 why it's rude to spy on 2 competing males? Kurt nodded enthusiastically and lowered himself into a crouch, ready to spring. The 3 mutants at the door looked at each other before sprinting off towards the nearest safe place. The fleeing teenagers awoke in Logan's wilder side and with a ground-shaking roar ran after them and opportune. Kurt followed the older male, laughing and growling as they both hunted their prey. The rest of the day was spent playing a big game of hide and seek, one which everyone soon joined in on. And whether Logan was ancient or not, it was these sort of moments that reminded him that he, too, had once been an unsure cub that hadn't grown into his class. End of Growls and Purrs. If you enjoyed this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or visit the original story from the link in the descriptions. Thank you for listening.